I want to tell you about the worst money decision I ever made. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't some wild gamble. It was a Tuesday. I had a little money saved at the time, not much, but enough that, for the first time in years, I felt something close to safe. And then a deal came across my path. A good one. The kind you're supposed to move on. I knew the numbers cold. The numbers said go, and I froze. Because saying yes meant watching my balance drop, and watching that number drop felt like watching myself bleed. So I sat on the cash. I called it being careful. I called it discipline. 6 months later, the opportunity was gone, and the money I'd protected so carefully had quietly lost value just sitting there, doing nothing. I didn't lose to a bad bet that day. I lost to a feeling. And once I started looking, I saw that feeling everywhere in my finances. It was never just one decision. It was a pattern. Every dumb thing I'd ever done with money traced back to some emotion I'd obeyed without questioning. Fear, pride, impatience, the need to be liked. Not one of them was a math error. Every single one was a feeling I let drive. And that's the thing no one ever warns you about. You spend your whole life being told that money problems are math problems. Earn more, spend less, save the difference. As if the only thing standing between you and wealth is a calculator. But I've come to believe something colder than that. And it took me years and a lot of lost money to admit it. Your math was never the problem. Your feelings were. Here's what I mean. Think back to the last real financial decision you made. Not buying coffee. A real one. Before you signed, before you clicked, before you said yes or no, what was happening in your chest? Was your heart going a little faster? Was there a knot in your stomach? Was there that quiet voice saying you deserve this? Or the colder one saying you can't afford to lose this now? Whatever it was, you felt it. And that feeling, sitting right there in the moment of decision, is the single most expensive thing you will ever carry. We get raised to think emotion is noble. Follow your heart. Trust your gut. And maybe in love, in friendship, in the stuff that actually matters at the end of your life. That's true. But money doesn't speak that language. Money is cold. The moment you bring a warm heart to a cold table, you've already lost the hand before the cards are even dealt. There was a man who understood this more than 200 years ago. Long before credit cards, before trading apps, before there was a single algorithm built to hijack your impulses. His name was Adam Smith. Most people only know him as the father of economics, the invisible hand, all of that. But before he ever wrote a word about markets, he wrote about something far more dangerous. He wrote about human feelings. And what he found should rattle anyone who has ever wondered where their money keeps disappearing to. Smith argued that we almost never chase money for the reasons we say. We tell ourselves it's about security, comfort, survival. But he looked closer and saw something uglier underneath. He said it isn't the comfort or the ease that really drives us. It's vanity, the need to be seen, noticed, admired. We don't actually want the bigger house. We want to be the kind of person other people picture living in the bigger house. We want the feeling, not the thing. I didn't believe that the first time I read it. It felt too cynical, too cold. Then I went back through my own spending with that one idea in mind, and it was honestly humiliating how often it held up. The clothes I barely wore, the upgrades nobody noticed, the investments that were really just me buying a story about myself. Smith had my number 200 years before I was born. Sit with that for a second, because it's the root of almost every financial mistake you'll ever make. The moment your money becomes about feeling instead of function, you stop being in charge of it. Your emotions take the wheel. And emotions are the easiest thing in the world to manipulate. Smith had a fix, a little mental trick he believed separated the disciplined from the destroyed. He called it the impartial spectator. Picture a calm, neutral observer living inside your own head. No fear, no greed, no ego. He just watches what you're about to do and asks one question: is this wise? Most people have shouted that voice into silence. They drowned it in wanting, in panic, in the noise of everyone around them. But the people who build real wealth, the ones who keep it for decades, learn to check in with that quiet observer before every move. They learn to feel the pull and not obey it. That's the whole game, not killing your emotions. Becoming someone they can't govern. I'm not going to pretend I do this perfectly. I still feel all of it. But the day I learned to put a little space between the feeling and the move, my whole financial life started to change. Let me be clear about what I'm not saying, because people hear this wrong all the time. I'm not telling you to become a robot. I'm not telling you to stop caring. You'll still want things, fear things, ache over things, and you should. Detachment isn't the death of feeling. It's just refusing to hand feeling the keys. You can be terrified and not sell. You can want something badly and walk away anyway. That tiny space between feeling something and acting on it is the only real estate where wealth ever actually gets built. Most people have no space at all. The feeling shows up and the decision's already made, fused, instant. The disciplined person builds that space on purpose and learns to live inside it. That's the entire skill. Everything after this is just that one skill aimed at a different part of your life. So, let me walk you through it. These are the laws of financial detachment, not motivation. Mechanics, the actual ways your attachment bleeds you, and how the disciplined few cut the cord. If something here stings, pay attention. The sting is the map. It's pointing right at the leak, is the map. It's pointing right at the leak. Law 1. Money is a tool, not a friend. Here's a contradiction I didn't notice for years. The people most attached to money are almost never rich. They clutch it. They check their balance for comfort, the way some people check their phone. And the genuinely wealthy treat money with this strange coldness, like it's lumber or fuel or soldiers to be sent out. Why does the broke man hold on and the rich man let go? Simple. The broke man feels his money. The rich man uses it. When money is a feeling, it turns into a security blanket. And you don't send a blanket out into the world to multiply. You wrap it around yourself. That was me, by the way. For a long stretch, I kept almost everything in cash. Because cash I could see, and what I could see felt safe. I watched friends invest, and I thought they were reckless. Then I did the math one night on what inflation had quietly done to my safe pile, and I felt sick. I'd guarded that money so carefully I let it die in my hands. Let me put two men side by side, because I've basically been both of them. The first one feels his money. Every unit in the account is a little hit of safety, so he keeps it close, where he can watch it. He never invests, because letting it out of his sight feels like loss. 20 years go by, and the pile's still there technically, but its power got eaten alive by inflation while he wasn't looking. The second man treats money like a tool that has no feelings about him in return. He keeps what he needs for safety and ships the rest out to work. No comfort holding it, no fear letting it go. 20 years later, the same paycheck has built him a machine that earns while he sleeps. Same income, same years. One clung, one deployed. The only variable was emotion. Adam Smith drew a hard line between the prudent man and the anxious one. Prudence to him was clear-eyed care about your own interest over time. Foresight without panic. The anxious man isn't prudent. He's frozen by attachment and calling it wisdom. Watch how the disciplined actually treat their capital. They don't ask how this money makes them feel safe. They ask where it can work hardest. Every unit becomes a worker with a job. Some go out to grow. Some stay in reserve, but as strategy, not as a comfort blanket. None of it stays just because letting go hurts. And there's a second trap inside the first. The same attachment that stops you investing also wrecks how you spend. The person who feels money intensely will blow it to relieve emotional pressure, then hoard it desperately to relieve the opposite pressure. Binge, then starve. Never strategy. It's the exact same pattern as someone who's lost control around food, and it ends the same way. Chaos dressed up as living. Detachment fixes both. When money is just a tool, spending becomes a calculation instead of a confession, and investing becomes deployment instead of abandonment. You stop feeling rich or poor, and you start measuring whether each move is simply correct. That flat, almost boring calm around money isn't coldness. It's the thing that lets a wealthy person sleep while their money stays up all night, working. So be honest with yourself. Do you use your money, or do you feel it? Don't answer fast. Sit in it. Because until money is a tool in your hand instead of a feeling in your chest, every clever strategy you learn after this will quietly fail. Quietly fail. Law 2. Never let what you own become who you are. I bought a watch once that I couldn't really afford. I told myself it was an investment. It wasn't. I bought it to be a certain kind of man. And here's the embarrassing part. The feeling I bought it for lasted about 3 days. By the end of the week, it was just a thing on my wrist. And the version of me I thought it would make me into never showed up. What did show up every month was the dent it left in my account. This is the quiet catastrophe of how we live now. People don't buy objects anymore. They buy identities. The watch isn't a watch. It's a man who's arrived. The car isn't transport. It's someone who matters. And the second your possessions become your identity, you've handed your whole financial life to an enemy you can't beat. Your own ego. And here's the trap inside the trap. An identity built on stuff can only move one direction. Up. Once the car is who you are, you can't ever be seen in a lesser one without it feeling like failure, so every next purchase has to match or beat the last. You've signed a contract with your ego that has no exit clause. The lifestyle ratchets up, the income strains to keep pace, and the day the income stumbles, the whole thing caves in because there was never anything underneath it but the things. That's how people pulling huge salaries end up with nothing. Not because they didn't earn, because they spent it all turning their net worth into a costume, and costumes don't pay your bills when the bills come due. Smith saw this 2 centuries before the first advertisement. He described the man who wears himself out, chasing trinkets and luxuries, not for any real comfort they give, but for the admiration he imagines they'll attract. He said, "We deceive ourselves constantly, dressing vanity up as need. And the cruelest part? The satisfaction never lands. The thing you bought to feel like somebody stops working almost instantly. So you need the next thing, and the next, on a treadmill that only speeds up the more you feed it. Look at what this does to your money. When your identity is welded to your lifestyle, you can't ever downgrade, even when downgrading is obviously the smart move. You can't keep the older car, even though keeping it would let you walk free in 10 years. You can't live below your means, because living below your means feels like becoming a smaller person. So you lock yourself in a cage made of appearances and call it a life. And here's what gets me. The genuinely wealthy people I've met often look painfully ordinary. Plain clothes, boring cars. Not because they're cheap, because they unhooked their worth from their stuff a long time ago, usually before they ever got rich. That's not a side effect of the money. That's how they got the money. They kept what everyone else torched on admiration. Picture 2 guys on the same street, same kind of paycheck. The first measures himself against the second. Neighbor gets a new car, he gets a new car. Neighbor renovates, he renovates. His whole financial life is a reaction to a man he isn't even sure he likes. And every reaction is financed, stretched, leveraged, just to keep the picture level. The second guy stopped competing years ago, drives the old car on purpose, keeps the house plain on purpose, quietly routes the difference into things that grow. To the street, the first one's winning. In reality, he's one missed paycheck from collapse, and the guy who looks like he's standing still is the only one actually moving. Try this on. Imagine you lost every status object you own tomorrow. The car, the clothes, the gadgets, the things you'd quietly hate to be seen without. Who's left? If that question scares you, the size of that fear is the exact size of the identity you've outsourced to objects. And whatever you've outsourced to objects, you'll spend the rest of your life paying to keep. Be someone who can't be repossessed. Can't be repossessed. Law 3. Kill the hunger to be admired. Now we get to the root of the whole thing. Under the attachment to money, under the attachment to objects, there's one master hunger driving almost every financial mistake a human being makes. The hunger to be approved of, to be admired, the desperate, mostly invisible need to be seen as successful by people whose opinion shouldn't matter to you at all. This was the center of everything Smith understood about us. He argued that what we're really chasing when we chase wealth isn't the wealth. It's other people's regard. He believed we imagined the rich man as someone gazed upon with sympathy and attention, and the poor man as someone overlooked, ignored, barely there. So we don't chase money. We chase being looked at. We chase mattering in the eyes of strangers. Think about how insane that actually is. You will spend money you don't have, on things you don't need, to impress people you don't even like, who are themselves too busy chasing approval to notice yours. Smith described the man wrecked by ambition as someone heaven visited in its anger, a man who burns his entire peace of mind chasing an admiration. He's sure that wealth will finally buy him, only to reach the end and find the prize was hollow the whole time. I know that man. I was that man at a dinner once. A group of people, a bill that was way too big, and I reached for it before anyone else could, fast. Like it was nothing. It was not nothing. I couldn't afford it. But I needed, for about 4 seconds, for that table to see me as the guy who could. And here's the thing that should have woken me up sooner. By the next morning, not one of them remembered. The admiration I'd paid real money for lasted exactly as long as the meal. Then the hunger came right back. Because approval isn't a thing you can own. It's a drug. Every hit buys a shorter high than the last, so you spend again, and more, chasing a feeling that backs away the second you reach it. And I started watching the people who'd actually escaped this, because they fascinated me. They were almost allergic to performing. They didn't announce their wins or broadcast their buys. They felt no urge to turn their money into other people's reactions, because they'd quit trading wealth for applause a long time back. From the outside, it read as modesty. Up close, it was something colder and harder than that. They'd simply decided the regard of strangers was the most overpriced thing on earth, and they stopped buying it. Smith wrote about the poor man's son who spends his whole life clawing toward riches he's convinced will finally make people look at him with respect, only to arrive at the end exhausted, having traded away every real comfort he ever had for an admiration that never once satisfied him. Don't be the son. Be the one who never needed the looking. You can catch this hunger in yourself with one simple test, and it's a little brutal. Next time you're about to buy something, pause and ask whether you'd still want it if it had to stay completely invisible. If no one could ever see it, ever know you owned it. A surprising amount of what we buy fails that test on the spot, which tells you it was never really the thing you wanted. It was the audience. The detached person breaks the chain at the source, not by pretending they don't care what anyone thinks, by making the impartial spectator outrank the crowd. Before they spend, they ask a different question. Not, what will people think of me, but, would the wisest version of me respect this? The verdict that runs their life lives inside them, not out there. And the second your approval comes from within, the entire economy built to exploit your insecurity loses its grip on your wallet. So here's a hard little exercise. Think of the last 3 things you bought that you'd never have bought if no one would ever know you owned them. Name them in your head, 1 word each, because those 3 things are a map of exactly where your hunger to be admired is draining your future. Draining your future. Law 4. Cut the loss without the funeral. The most expensive decisions of your life won't be the things you buy. They'll be the things you refuse to let go of. There's a specific attachment that has ruined more wealth than reckless spending ever could, and it's attachment to what you've already lost. The losing investment you keep holding because selling means admitting you were wrong. The dying business you keep funding because you've already poured so much in. You stay, not because staying is smart, because leaving hurts. Held a side project 2 years past the point it was clearly dead. Everyone could see it, but me. And every month I told myself the same lie, that I just needed a little more time, a little more money, because quitting would have meant the years I'd already sunk in were a write-off. So I kept feeding it. I wasn't building anything. I was avoiding a feeling, the pain of one big loss, swapped for the slower pain of 100 small ones, and slow bleeding kills. This is one of the oldest flaws in the human mind. We treat what we've already spent as a reason to spend more. The money's gone, the time's gone, and we let those ghosts vote on our next move anyway. Smith's prudent man doesn't do this. He judges every decision from where he's standing right now, looking forward. The money already lost is irrelevant to him because no amount of loyalty to it will ever bring it back. The only question that matters is the one the impartial spectator asks. Given where I am today, what's the wisest next move? The past is information. It is not a reason to keep losing. You can watch this in any market, any era. Centuries ago in Holland, men poured fortunes into tulip bulbs at prices that made no sense. And when it all collapsed, the ruined didn't sell. They held, waiting for the impossible prices to come back, clinging to the moment they'd been rich on paper. The same scene replays every generation with a different object. People hold the falling thing, not because holding is wise, but because selling buries the version of themselves that was winning. The detached move is brutal and simple. You let yourself be wrong fast. You pull your ego off the decision so that walking away from a bad one feels like intelligence instead of humiliation, which is a skill, not a personality trait, and it can be built. I had to build it the hard way. Now I try to close dead things the way you rip off a bandage. One sharp second of pain, then it's done. Then I move whatever's left somewhere better, lighter, and a little wiser. The old version of me used to ride ships down that had sunk years earlier, saluting them the whole way to the bottom, calling it loyalty. It wasn't loyalty. It was fear of feeling the loss all at once. Don't salute the wreck. Get in the lifeboat. And it isn't just investments. It's everywhere. Once you see it, people stay in jobs that died years ago because leaving means admitting the years were wasted. They keep paying for things they stopped using because cancelling feels like defeat. They cling to money habits, advisors, partnerships, long past the point those things turned against them, all to dodge the small discomfort of the goodbye. Every one of those is the same mistake wearing a different coat. You're not protecting an asset. You're protecting your feelings, and you're paying full price for the privilege. Look at the great investors instead. They're wrong constantly. The difference between them and the ruined amateur isn't that they avoid losses. It's that they leave losses without ceremony. The thesis breaks, and they're out, clean, already moving the money somewhere better. The amateur sits frozen, watching the number fall, whispering that it'll come back. He's not investing anymore. He's grieving. And grief is a terrible portfolio manager. So look hard at your own life. What are you still funding, with money or with energy? Only because you've already put in too much to stop. You already know what it is. The only real question is whether you've got the detachment to let it go. Attachment to let it go. Law 5. Stop needing to be right. There's an attachment more expensive than the love of money, quieter than the rest, and almost no one admits to it. The attachment to being right. Most people would genuinely rather be right than be wealthy. They won't say it, but their decisions confess it constantly. Someone makes a financial call out loud, and then spends real money defending it, not because the evidence backs them, but because changing their mind in front of others feels like losing. The ego writes the check. The bank account covers it. I've done this. I made a bet once, said it confidently to people I respected, and then watched the facts slowly turn against me. And instead of folding, I dug in. I went looking only for the information that agreed with me. I argued harder. Every warning sign became an insult I had to defeat instead of a signal I should have heeded. I wasn't trying to make money by then. I was trying to win an argument with reality. Reality, as it turns out, does not lose arguments. Smith understood that the most dangerous self-deception is the kind that flatters us, because we never see it. We are unbelievably good at building reasons for what we already wanted to believe. The impartial spectator was his cure precisely because it drags you outside your own ego and forces you to look at your choices the way a stranger would, with no pride to protect. And there's no better proof of this than one of the greatest minds who ever lived, Isaac Newton. The man who mapped the motion of the planets put his money into a wildly inflating market. Early on, he was smart. He sold, walked away with a tidy profit. But then he watched the price keep climbing. Watched men far dumber than him getting rich while he stood on the sidelines. And something emotional took over, the unbearable feeling of being left behind. So he bought back in, near the top, far more than before. When it crashed, He lost a fortune. He's supposed to have said afterward that he could calculate the movements of the heavens, but not the madness of men. Let that land. This wasn't a fool. This was maybe the greatest scientific mind in human history. And what ruined him wasn't a gap in his reasoning, it was envy. His intellect told him to stay out. His feelings dragged him back in at the worst price, for the worst reason. If raw genius couldn't save him, drop the fantasy that being clever will save you. It won't. The market doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards the person who can keep his intelligence in charge of his feelings, which is a far rarer thing. You see the same thing every single day, just smaller and quieter. Someone buys into an idea, the facts shift, and instead of updating, he hunkers down, blocks out anything that disagrees, starts treating every counter-argument like a personal attack. He stopped trying to be correct and started trying to win, and those are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. Being correct sometimes means saying the words that cost you the most. I was wrong. 3 syllables. Most people would rather lose money than say out loud. So they lose the money. Quietly, repeatedly, for years, all to protect a feeling the impartial spectator would have talked them out of in about 10 seconds. So hold your money opinions loosely, the way a professional does. Make your call, then stay willing to unmake it. The instant reality disagrees. Let the calm observer overrule your ego every single time. Because the most expensive sentence in any language isn't, "I lost money." It's, "I knew I was right." So, before we move on, ask yourself one uncomfortable thing. Where in your money life are you still defending a position mostly because backing down would feel like losing face? A stock, a stance, a plan you announced too loudly to too many people. Name it. One word. Because the thing you're defending to protect your pride is almost always the thing quietly costing you the most. And here's where it gets heavier. Everything so far has been about attachments you can almost see: money, objects, approval, losses, being right. But there are deeper ones, quieter ones, attachments so stitched into who you think you are that you've never once questioned them, even though they might be the exact things keeping you stuck. That's where we're going next, because the chains that hold you longest are the ones you stopped noticing you wear. Everything we just covered, you can at least argue with. You can look at a stupid purchase and know somewhere that it was stupid. The attachments coming next are different. These ones never show up as choices at all. They wear the mask of your personality, your values, your common sense. The man attached to comfort calls himself responsible. The man attached to the crowd calls himself loyal. The man attached to his own sad story calls himself a realist. None of them can see the attachment, because the attachment is the thing doing the seeing, and what you can't see, you can't cut. So the first move here is just to look, honestly, at the parts of your life that feel the most like you, because that's exactly where they're hiding. I resisted every one of these for years, by the way. They were the last to go, long after I'd cleaned up the obvious stuff. The obvious attachments embarrass you the second you see them. These ones flatter you. They make you feel grounded, loyal, realistic, mature. That's the whole trick. The attachment you're proud of is the one that owns you the longest, because you'll defend it instead of dropping it. So read what's coming with your guard down. The part of you that wants to argue with it is usually the exact part that needs to hear it. Exact part that needs to hear it. Law 6. Be suspicious of comfort. I stayed in a job 2 years longer than I should have. It wasn't a bad job. That was the problem. It was comfortable, safe. The money showed up every month like clockwork. And every single year I told myself that next year I'd make my move. The familiar paycheck was a slow drug, and I kept taking it. Looking back, the comfort didn't protect me. It put me to sleep. And the scary part is how reasonable it felt the whole way through. I wasn't lazy. I worked hard. I just worked hard inside a box I'd quietly agreed to stop questioning. That's the thing about comfort. It doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like maturity. It feels like you finally settled down and got realistic, while the years slide past and the box gets cozier, which only makes it harder to leave, until one day you look up and realize you've built an entire life out of not deciding, Smith understood why we do it. He said the imagination magnifies the pain of changing and shrinks the pain of staying the same, so the math in our heads is rigged before we ever run it. We feel the risk of leaving like a punch to the face. We feel the cost of staying like almost nothing, because it's smeared so thin across so many years that no single day of it ever hurts enough to act on. So, we keep choosing the slow bleed over the sharp fear every single morning, and we call it being responsible. There's a force quietly running your financial life that almost no one names, because it disguises itself as a virtue. It calls itself stability. Being responsible, knowing your place. Its real name is attachment to the familiar, and it has buried more potential than failure ever has. We're wired to pick the known over the unknown, even when the known is slowly killing us. The job that pays just enough to keep you from leaving, the routine that asks nothing and gives nothing back, the income level you quietly accepted as the ceiling of your life. None of it feels like a decision. It feels like reality. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. A cage you chose is still a cage, but a cage you stopped noticing has become a home. Smith saw it. He pointed out that men will endure a known discomfort rather than risk an unknown improvement, because the imagination blows up the danger of changing while shrinking the cost of staying still. You feel the risk of the new move today, in your gut, vivid. The slow cost of staying put, the years draining away, the doors closing that never open again, you barely feel at all. Because it arrives on a delay, spread thin across a whole life. So you trade an enormous invisible loss to avoid a small visible fear, and you call it being sensible. Run it forward, and the cost gets impossible to ignore. Two people start in the same spot, same job, same modest pay. The first one worships stability. He stays where it's safe, does what's asked, dodges the discomfort of asking for more or building something on the side. 10 years later, he has the exact life he started with, just older. And now the familiar's become a trap he's too tired to question. The second one treats comfort like a warning light. He keeps the steady income, but spends every uncomfortable opportunity it buys him learning, building, walking into rooms that scare him. 10 years later, he's unrecognizable. Not because he was smarter, because he refused to let safety put him under. And the cruelest version of this is the one that looks the most respectable. The man who did everything right. Stable job, steady raises, decades of showing up, loyal to a company and an industry that felt like solid ground. Then the ground moved, the way it always eventually does, and he found out the security he'd organized his entire life around was never actually his. It belonged to someone else, and it left the moment they decided it should. Comfort told him he was safe right up until the second it didn't. That's the deal comfort always offers, and it never, ever honors it. And here's the lie at the center of all of it. Staying still feels like staying safe. It isn't. The ground moves, whether you move or not. Industries that felt permanent vanish. Skills that guaranteed a living turn worthless. The savings that felt secure quietly lose their power. The man clinging to the familiar isn't avoiding risk. He just picked the one risk he refuses to look at, and it's usually the biggest one of all. So, look at the easy parts of your life, not the hard parts, the easy ones, the places you stopped pushing because pushing isn't required anymore. Somewhere in that comfort is the exact spot where your growth lay down and went to sleep. One word, said honestly, is enough to wake it up. Is enough to wake it up. Law 7. Audit who you're really paying for. Now, the delicate one, the one that hides behind love. The people in your life are shaping your finances more than any strategy ever will, and almost none of those decisions are getting made with your head. They're getting made with your heart. And I learned this the expensive way. A friend asked me for money once. I knew, in the calm part of my mind, that I'd probably never see it again, and that the loan wasn't going to fix his actual problem anyway. But saying no meant sitting in his disappointment, maybe his resentment, maybe the silence after. So I handed it over and told myself it was kindness. It wasn't kindness. It was me buying my own relief from an uncomfortable feeling. I was the customer in that transaction, not him. Understand this clearly. Almost nobody goes broke alone. They go broke surrounded by people whose expectations and habits and needs slowly rewrite their financial behavior. The friend you can't say no to. The relative who treats your money like a shared account. The partner who's spending you cover out of guilt. The circle whose lifestyle you match, not because you can afford it, but because falling behind them feels like rejection. None of these are budget decisions. They're emotional ones. And they might be costing you more than every other mistake on this list combined. Smith built his whole understanding of human nature on what he called sympathy, our deep instinct to feel what others feel and to want their good opinion. It's a beautiful thing. It's also a trapdoor, because that same instinct, that same need to please and belong, is what makes you lend money you'll never get back and bleed your future through 100 small acts of guilt. You're not being generous. You're being managed by your own emotions, and people learn, sometimes without even meaning to, exactly which strings to pull. The detached person doesn't get cruel here. They get clear. They learn to tell the difference between real love and emotional obligation, and there's a world of difference. Real love doesn't ask you to set your future on fire to prove it. They can still give, generously even, but from choice, not from guilt. They can say no without falling apart over someone's disappointment, because they finally figured out that a no said clearly is more honest than a yes said from fear. And there's a harder layer under that. Some people in your life are quietly attached to you staying exactly where you are. Your growth threatens them. It reminds them of the thing they never tried. So they discourage your ambition, joke about your discipline, nudge you back toward the spending and the habits that keep you on their level. Usually they don't even know they're doing it. The crowd has a gravity, and that gravity always pulls toward the average. Choose your gravity on purpose, or it gets chosen for you. I watched this happen to someone close to me. Every time he tried to save, the circle would plan a trip, a night out, an upgrade, and saying no would have meant explaining himself, defending himself, slowly drifting out of the group. So he never said it. He matched them, year after year, financing a life he didn't even particularly want, just to keep his seat at the table. He wasn't weak. He was loyal, but the bill for that loyalty came straight out of his future, and his future never got a vote. The people pulling on you rarely mean you any harm. That's what makes it so hard to push back. You're not fighting an enemy. You're fighting love and habit and the fear of being left out, all at the same time. So get surgical about it, because giving and bleeding look identical from the outside. Giving is a choice you make from strength, freely, with a number you decided in advance, and no resentment attached to it. Bleeding is what happens when you can't stand someone's disappointment, so you pay money to make the feeling go away. One builds your character, the other quietly takes apart your future, while you congratulate yourself for being a good person. So, run the audit. Go through the relationships that touch your money and ask one ruthless question of each. Is this draining me out of guilt or giving from choice? You don't have to do anything today, but you do have to see it. You can't fix a leak you won't look at. Law 8. Stop needing it to happen fast. There's an emotion that has wrecked more wealth than greed and fear put together. Impatience. The physical, almost itchy need for things to happen now. And it's the natural enemy of the one force that actually builds fortunes, which is time. I went through a phase, and I'm not proud of it, where I needed to feel like I was getting rich, not actually getting rich, feeling it. So I jumped on whatever promised fast returns, got the little hit of action, lost, and jumped on the next thing. I mistook motion for momentum for years. The whole time, my hunger for fast money was the exact reason I stayed, broke slowly. What finally pulled me out wasn't a better opportunity. It was exhaustion. I got tired of starting over, tired of the rush wearing off and dropping me right back where I'd started. The day I picked one boring path and just committed to being patient with it was the least exciting financial decision of my life, and it's the only one that ever actually worked. Watch what impatience does to a decision. The person attached to speed can't let anything compound, because watching slow growth feels like watching paint dry while everyone else seems to be getting rich overnight. So he bails early, or he chases the thing that promises to skip the wait, the scheme, the gamble, the shortcut that ends the same way every time. He's not an investor. He's an addict, hooked on the feeling of movement. Smith's prudent man was defined by his relationship with time. He'd give up a small pleasure now for a larger security later. Every time. That's not a trick. It's a temperament. It's the ability to sit calmly in the gap between effort and reward. That long, silent, unrewarding stretch where almost everyone quits because nothing seems to be happening and every instinct is screaming that it isn't working, but it is working. That's the part the impatient can never feel. Let me make the math real, because the emotions lie about it constantly. A modest amount, set aside consistently and left completely alone, does almost nothing impressive for a long time. Year after year it crawls, so slowly that quitting feels reasonable, even smart, because the payoff never looks worth the discipline. But growth that builds on itself doesn't move in a straight line. It bends. The same boring habit that produced almost nothing for a decade can produce more in its final few years than in all the earlier ones combined. The guy who feels the early slowness and quits never sees the bend. The one who can detach from the need for a visible reward, who keeps going through the long flat stretch where it feels pointless, is the only one who ever reaches the part of the curve where everything happens at once. The greatest investors built their whole names on this single thing. They're not faster than everyone else. They're calmer. They train themselves to be greedy when the crowd is terrified and patient when the crowd is euphoric, which is only possible for someone who unhooked their decisions from the mood of the room. Their edge isn't a secret formula. It's the willingness to sit still while everyone around them is moving just to feel like they're moving. There's an old, unglamorous truth buried in that. The tortoise wins, and the tortoise is boring. And that's precisely why almost nobody can stand to be the tortoise. We don't want the slow, certain thing. We want the fast, exciting thing, even when the fast thing has a far worse record, because the slow thing doesn't feed the emotion. Smith's whole idea of prudence was the discipline to want the right outcome more than the right feeling, to keep your eyes on the security 10 years out instead of the thrill 10 minutes out. It's not flashy. It never trends. It just works. Picture the two of them. One needs to feel progress, so he chases, jumps on whatever's hot, rides the rush, loses, jumps again. 100 near misses stacked into a lifetime of motion. The other does something that looks almost boring next to him, picks one sound path and refuses to leave it. Through the years, it feels pointless. Through the temptation of faster things, through the silence. A decade on, the first guy is wiped out and right where he started, full of war stories. The second, who looked like he was doing nothing the entire time, has quietly built something the first will never catch. So be honest. Are you actually investing, or are you just chasing the feeling of action? One word, because if you can't sit still long enough to let anything grow, it was never the market keeping you poor. It was the part of you that couldn't wait. Law 9. Burn the story where you're the victim. This is the one that'll offend the most people, which is exactly why it matters most. The heaviest attachment a person can carry isn't to money or stuff or status. It's to a story about themselves. And for a lot of people, that story is the story of why they can't. Listen carefully, because this is subtle, and I lived inside it for years. There's a strange secret comfort in believing the game is rigged, the system's against you, the rich are just different, the odds are impossible, and therefore none of this is really your fault. That story feels like protection. As long as the reason you haven't built anything lives outside of you, in the economy, in your upbringing, in your bad luck, in everyone who wronged you, then you never have to face the harder possibility that you could have moved and you chose not to. The victim story is a painkiller. And like every painkiller, the relief is real and the long-term cost is brutal. I told myself that story for a long time. It was comfortable. It explained everything and demanded nothing. And here's what it cost me, what it costs everyone who runs it. The person attached to their own helplessness will quietly sabotage every opportunity that threatens the story, because if they succeeded, the story would have to die, and the story has become part of who they are. So watch how it works, because it's never dramatic. The opportunity shows up, the real one, the one that could actually change things, and the mind goes straight to work, not to grab it, but to take it apart. It finds the reason it won't work. It drags up every past failure as proof. It manufactures certainty that trying would just end in embarrassment, and underneath that certainty there's this strange little relief, because not trying means the comforting story survives untouched. The person doesn't experience this as cowardice. They experience it as realism. Wisdom, even. That's what makes it lethal. From the inside, the victim's story doesn't feel like a story. It feels like the plain truth about a hostile world. And as long as it feels like truth, it never gets questioned, and the door it's blocking stays shut forever. You can probably feel it happening in real time, if you're honest. Someone mentions an opportunity, and before they've even finished the sentence, your mind has already lined up the reasons it won't work for you. Not enough money. Not the right timing. Not the right connections. People like me don't. The list writes itself, smooth and instant, like it had been sitting there waiting. And there's a tiny flicker of relief when you land on the reason, because now you're off the hook. The story's safe, and you can go back to your evening. That flicker is the tell. That's the attachment, protecting itself, right in front of you. Smith's whole picture of a dignified human life rested on the opposite idea, that a person isn't just a leaf blown around by circumstance, but a being capable of standing apart from his own situation, judging it clearly, and governing his response to it. To hand that away, to declare yourself the helpless product of forces you can't control, feels like humility. It's actually surrender. The hard, freeing truth is that the world being unfair and you still being responsible for what you do about it are not contradictions. They're both true at the same time. The disciplined person carries both and uses neither as an excuse to stop. And I'll be straight with you. Putting that story down was uncomfortable in a way I didn't see coming, because dropping it meant I no longer got to be a victim of the world. It meant the next failure was on me. That's terrifying. It's also the most freeing thing I've ever done, because the exact same logic that made it my fault also made it mine to fix. You don't get to keep the comfort of helplessness and the power of ownership at the same time. You have to pick one. One of them builds wealth. The other just builds a really convincing explanation for why you don't have any. So here's the hardest question in all of this. Somewhere in your head is a story about why your financial life looks the way it does, a story that points outward, at the world. Find it, and ask it one cold thing. If this story were no longer allowed to be my excuse, what would I be forced to do? Sit with the answer. Because that answer is the door, and that story has been standing in front of it your whole life. Your whole life. Law 10. Become the calm observer. Everything we've covered lands in one place, the same place Smith pointed to 2.5 centuries ago. Master yourself, not the markets, not the money. The one thing that's been secretly steering every financial move you've ever made, your own emotional nature. Smith believed the highest virtue a human being could build was self-command, the ability to govern your fear, your wanting, your pride, your impatience, your hunger to be liked, and to act instead from a calm, clear center. And the tool for it was that observer inside you, the neutral one who watches your life like a stranger would, and asks, without flattery and without panic, what's actually wise here? Wealth sits downstream of that. The money is only ever a reflection of whether you're being run by your impulses or running them. Let me show you the whole thing in one moment. Picture a market in free fall. Headlines screaming, people who felt rich a month ago watching it all collapse, and the fear in the air is almost physical. In that moment, the attached person sells, because the feeling of the loss is unbearable and selling makes it stop, even though it locks the loss in forever and hands his assets to someone calmer at the bottom. And who's the someone calmer? It's the person who built the space, who feels the identical fear and just doesn't obey it, who looks at the panic through the observer's eyes and sees the best opportunity in years. Same event, same fear, opposite move, opposite life. The entire difference is self-command, not the absence of the fear, the refusal to be ruled by it. I've been on the wrong side of that moment. The first time I held through a real panic instead of selling, my whole body was screaming at me to act. It felt like standing still in a fire. But I'd practiced the small versions enough by then that I could feel the terror and keep my hands off the sell button. That single held breath made me more money than any clever move I've ever made. Not because I was smart that day, because for once I wasn't emotional. That's the whole secret, if there even is one. It's not that wealthy people feel less than you do. Plenty of them feel everything, intensely. They've just put in enough reps that the feeling and the action stopped being the same event. They get a vote in between the two. Most people never build that vote. So the emotion lands and the decision's already cast. No gap, no choice. Done. Build the vote. It's the most valuable thing you will ever own, and you can't buy it anywhere, which is exactly why so few people have it. And look at how much it covers. Attachment to money paralyzed you. Attachment to your stuff chained you to appearances. Attachment to approval bankrupted you for the benefit of strangers. Attachment to your losses kept you bleeding out. Attachment to being right made you blind. Attachment to comfort put you to sleep. Attachment to the people around you drained you dry. Attachment to speed sabotaged the one thing that actually builds wealth. And attachment to your own sad story bolted the door from the inside. 9 different masks, 1 disease, and underneath every one of them, the same single cure. Step back. Let the calm observer take a look. Refuse to obey the feeling that's trying to make you act against yourself. That single move, made over and over, is the entire thing. It's unglamorous. It's quiet. It will never trend on anything. And it is the line that separates the people who keep their money from the people who keep losing it. In every economy that has ever existed, and every one that ever will, the tools change. The trap doesn't, and neither does the way out. This is why wealth and self-mastery were never 2 separate projects. They're one. Every fortune out there is built on a foundation, and the foundation is your relationship with your own impulses. The man who hasn't mastered his fear gets shaken out at the bottom. The man who hasn't mastered his greed gets wiped out at the top. The one who hasn't mastered his vanity spends his gains on a costume, and the one who hasn't mastered his impatience never lets anything grow. Master the man, and the money's got nowhere to go but toward him, and nowhere to stay but with him. Neglect the man, and there's no income on earth big enough to outrun his own emotions. Now stop thinking about how much you earn. Stop thinking about your balance, your debts, your salary, all the numbers that have been quietly telling you who you are. Think instead about who's making your decisions. The scared, hungry, impatient, approval-starved part of you, or the calm one who can watch all of that and still choose well. Put it in a single word, the version of you you intend to be from right now. Just one, because that word is the man who builds the wealth, and the man who keeps it, and the man no system was ever built to control. And understand, none of this flips on overnight. Detachment isn't a switch. It's a muscle, and it gets built the way every real strength gets built, under resistance, with reps. The first time you feel the pull of approval and refuse it, it'll hurt. The first time you walk away from the sunk cost, the first time you sit in the silence of the long game without flinching, it'll feel unnatural, because it is your overriding instincts older than money itself. But every time you do it, the observer gets a little louder, and the impulses that used to own you lose a little grip. Do it long enough, and one day you'll notice the things that used to run your life barely move you anymore. That's the day you got wealthy. Whether or not the money's caught up yet, I'm not at the end of this, by the way. I won't pretend I've risen above my own nature because I haven't, and anyone telling you they have is selling something. I still feel the pull. The difference now is that I feel it, and I usually get to decide whether to follow it. Usually is enough. You don't have to be perfectly detached. You just have to be detached at the handful of moments that actually decide your life. The big buy, the panic, the bet, the goodbye. Get those few right, and you can be a mess everywhere else, and still finish ahead of almost everyone. I started this by telling you about the worst money decision I ever made. The truth is, it wasn't really about money at all. It was about a man who let his feelings hold the wheel and the slow, expensive education it took to take it back. If anything in here landed, if it didn't just sound clever but actually pressed on something real, then don't let it die as one more thing you nodded along to and forgot by morning. What I've laid out is the first layer. There's more underneath it, harder mechanics of money and the mind that no single video can really hold, not because they're hidden, but because most people won't sit with them long enough to use them. That's the quiet reason the crowd stays the crowd. If you felt, even once in the last few minutes, that you don't belong in that crowd, then stick around, because everything here is built to do one thing. Take the wheel back from the part of you that's been crashing the car. No noise, no comfort, just the truth, told straight. Most people will hear all of this and change nothing by tomorrow. A few of you won't. You already know which one you are. The only question that was ever really yours is what you do with the next decision, the one waiting for you the moment this ends. Waiting for you the moment this ends.